So maybe you're in the middle of an argument or disagreement that could be quite small, but all of a sudden you see that you have this deep urge to bring up unresolved issues from the past. And perhaps from your partner or loved one's perspective on the other side, they're going, wait, why are you bringing up the past? This is something we've talked about before. I thought we set this to rest. Well, there's a reason that the fearful avoidant attachment style continuously tends to visit old arguments. And there's actually three major ones in total. And without understanding these underlying reasons as to why this takes place so frequently, you may easily find yourself repeating old argument patterns over and over again, often to the detriment of your relationship with somebody you love and care about. And you may find that even though you bring these things back up, you're not actually feeling like they ever get resolved. So in today's video, we're going to go through the three major reasons as to why fearful avoidant attachment styles bring up past arguments over and over again. And most importantly, we're going to talk about what you can do differently in a short period of time in a fast and simple way to totally revolutionize this pattern. A, so that you feel resolved in arguments way easier. B, so that you don't actually bring up old things over and over again to the point where it can cause some damage or harm to the relationship. But most importantly, so that you're not carrying and fostering resentment all the time because of things going left unsaid or unresolved to begin with. So if you're new to this channel, hello and welcome. My name is Thais. I'm really happy that you stopped by. I create daily content here on YouTube all about the subconscious mind, healing, dating, and attachment styles after working in this field for more than a decade. So if you have any questions about this video today, please let me know in the comments below. And I'm hoping that if you enjoy this video today, you will also subscribe to the channel or perhaps share this video with somebody you think might benefit. So here's the first thing, okay? The first of three major reasons. And I think that this can't quite be said enough. And it's the fact that fearful avoidant attachment styles are almost always operating by something known as covert contracts. Okay, what is covert contracts? Well, covert contracts are a very common feature of codependency. And basically, how a covert contract works is it's based on this idea that somebody feels too afraid to communicate their needs upfront in a direct and vulnerable way with their partner. And oftentimes they may even just believe at a deeply subconscious level that even if they did communicate, their needs wouldn't be met anyways. And that's not necessarily a reflection of their partner that they're in the relationship with, but maybe more of a reflection of the fact that growing up, they didn't really have access to their needs being met or seen or heard or understood. And so you got conditioned to just believe that, well, my needs aren't going to be met anyway. So it's almost like an unknown that you could even communicate them to somebody. And so as a result of this, you tend to operate in relationships through hyper vigilantly recognizing what other people's needs are, which is something that fearful avoidants are the best at more than any other attachment style, is reading between the lines and noticing micro expressions and body language and tone of voice changes and sort of taking and extracting that information to guess what somebody's feeling or what they're needing or what they're thinking. And a lot of times you're probably quite right about what your guesses are. But a lot of other attachment styles are not necessarily as adept as the fearful avoidant attachment style at discovering what people's needs are. So, all of this to say on this point number one, that if you don't know how to communicate your needs, and yet you are really good at guessing and recognizing other people's needs, in fact, often more so than other attachment styles are, there is an extremely high chance that you end up operating by covert contracts and relationships that feel unfulfilled. And basically, a covert contract is okay, I'm going to read between the lines and guess what your needs are. Then I'm going to really go over and above and beyond to meet your needs, hoping that what I'm really doing at the same time is buying my ability back for you to want to meet my needs. Okay. So it's this idea that if I invest in you enough, you'll then feel obligated or have to invest in me back, or maybe you'll see that I'm worthy of investing back. And on one hand, this is quite a common theme or pattern for many people. And honestly, hearing about this, you might even be like, wait, what's wrong with that? What's the problem here? Well, the problem is the fact that what this filters out almost immediately is the opportunity for healthy communication. Securely attached people in secure relationships, the one thing they do very well is they communicate their needs directly and they don't rely on mind reading, which is obviously we don't actually think people are mind reading, but it's a psychological concept that means you expect the other person to get it, to figure it out if they care. In fact, I've often had countless conversations with fearful avoidants who have said, Well, if this person really loved me, they would have figured out what my needs are. But that's not how healthy relationships are built. They're not built upon figuring out each other's needs and guessing. They're built upon open communication and the normalization of communication that's so clear. The communication and asking about needs feels as easy as asking somebody for a glass of water. Now, I can tell you before I get to these two other points that as somebody who was fearful avoidant myself, and this was the attachment style that I had to work through, and in order to become securely attached, I absolutely operated by covert contracts. And at the roots of this, it was because I felt unworthy. And so I thought, okay, I have to give more than I receive all the time. And then, if I give way more, then somebody will finally see that it's okay to meet one of my needs. And they'll feel like, okay, it's, I'll feel safe to even ask or to bring something up. But I never would ask for a need unless I felt like I had kind of earned it from somebody, which is highly dysfunctional, by the way. But again, if you would ask me this like 15 years ago, I thought that was normal. And I couldn't even imagine something outside of that. And so, what ends up taking place, and I'll tell you in a few moments how this relates back to why fearful avoidants bring up past arguments, but you'll see it really comes full circle. But how this ends up showing up in your relationships is that you will constantly overgive and underreceive. You will constantly, as a result of that, feel unseen and unheard. Like, okay, I have to do so much just to get a little bit. And arguably, worst of all, the moment somebody says no to one of your needs, which, by the way, people are not always going to be able to meet all of your needs, right? Maybe you ask somebody for a need that in the background for 30 days, you've been like, oh, I'm going to probably ask for some help with something next month. So let me, for the next few weeks, just really pour into this relationship. So I've earned my right to ask for this need. And then let's say for whatever reason, that person, you ask them to, go to an event with you where they have to travel and they're just not available. And you're like, the amount of hurt that causes isn't just about that moment in time, right? It's not just about, oh, the person's unavailable for this event and I just asked them about it. No, it's the fact that like for 30 days, you've been building up to trying to feel comfortable enough to even ask for this need to be met or ask for this person to do something that you were hoping they would do. And so, of course, it's not always like a 30-day cycle for people, but a lot of times when we're operating by covert contracts, we are literally in a position where we are pouring into something, hoping that then it's okay for us to ask for something back later. And what this does is it just creates these tremendous breeding grounds for you to feel resentful, for you to feel not cared about because you're expecting somebody to read your mind. And unfortunately, if you are a fearful avoidant, you're going to be the best person at quote unquote mind reading, which of course you're not actually reading minds, but like at reading between the lines and trying to guess what somebody's feeling and needing. And you're going to be so much better than that, better than other attachment styles at that, that it's always going to feel like if you're operating by covert contracts, that you're giving so much more than you're ever getting in terms of what you're actually needing back. And I want to explore one other thing here about this concept, right? Oftentimes the reason fearful avoidants are so much better at this, and I still have to tell you the two other points, how this relates to why you bring up past arguments, but oftentimes the reason that you're better at mind reading is if you look at the different attachment strategies that the different attachment styles have, our anxiously attached style, or the anxious attachment style, their attachment strategy is to maintain proximity. It's like to get closer to people. Yes, they can be a little hypervigilant around abandonment and read between the lines there, but oftentimes it's less like they're really hyper attuned to micro expressions in body language and more like they're recognizing if somebody pulls back and then they're giving that meaning, like, oh my gosh, the person's going to abandon me. Dismissive avoidance. So their main strategy is to maintain their freedom and independence and autonomy. It's what makes them feel safe. Okay, if I can maintain my freedom, then maybe it's safe enough to attach a little bit to somebody. Fearful avoidant attachment styles, because you usually grow up in chaos of some kind, whether it's a parent who's an alcoholic or has a personality disorder or who is struggling, and maybe you've got an environment where there's just a tremendous amount of fighting or a bad divorce, like all these things for a fearful avoidant, what that actually creates is a child who, in order to survive that environment, you become extremely hyper vigilant about what's going to happen. So you may find, for example, that if you're fearful avoidant, let's just pretend, like as an analogy, that your environment you grew up in was you had a parent who was an alcoholic. Well, you're always looking for like, okay, is this person sober? Are they going to be in a good mood when they're sober? Are they going to be in a bad mood because they're going through detox or withdrawals? Are they they're drinking? Okay, are they in a good mood when they're drinking or bad mood? Should I be scared? Should I be, and you're always reading between the lines to recognize what could be going on. And it makes you extremely hypervigilant. And so your attachment strategy is like you want closeness, but you're scared of it at the same time. And so you just read between the lines to try to predict everything that you can. And that really is the attachment pattern of a fearful avoidance. So now you have this dynamic where, from a covert contract point of view, you are going to be overgiving, under receiving. And that's really what brings me to point number 2 here: overgiving and under receiving, leaving you feeling unfulfilled in the relationship. And then what a lot of fearful avoidants do here, and again, you're going to see in a moment how this all pairs into like why you bring up past arguments. But what this is going to leave you feeling a lot of times is like people are not showing up for you in the way that you're showing up for them. And you may feel like you have a series of one-way relationships in your life. But here's the craziest part: you may make that mean that other people don't care about you the way you care about them. And oftentimes that's not even the case whatsoever. Oftentimes somebody on the receiving end thinks they're loving you and caring for you in a great way and in the way that you would need. And they're not often recognizing that things are going unsaid or unnoticed in regards to you feeling fulfilled or like you're getting your needs met in the relationship. And when you don't communicate about your needs, you hold it in, and you start tracking. Okay. A lot of fearful avoidance when you are not getting your needs met, you start tracking all the times you weren't getting your needs met, and you start to build a narrative or a story like, okay, they didn't do this for me last Friday. And then 2 months before that, this other thing didn't happen. And I did this for them at this point, and they didn't even do this. Now, some people, right, from the outside would say, oh, this is petty. Like you shouldn't be tracking. Well, what people don't realize is that when you're in this, for you, it's kind of like a survival strategy for how you relate to people. It's like, okay, I have to make sure I'm tracking everything in all of our interactions so that I can keep giving more than I receive, so that I can feel worthy of love and connection, so that I can feel safe to even ask for any of my little needs that I have at all without being a burden or without that sacrificing the relationship and me seeming like this person who needs too much and is too greedy for their needs in a relationship and is taking up too much space. And so you're tracking because it's your way of trying to stay and keep the relationship surviving. Okay? So it's this strategy. Now again, you're going to see in point number 3 how this all comes together. But what I want to really harp on in point number 2 is if you're always over giving and under receiving, not only does that mean that you're constantly having to track your interactions, but on top of that, it also means that you're not only tracking your interactions, but sometimes if your needs go unmet for long enough, you'll find yourself full steam ahead down the rabbit hole of going, oh, this person doesn't care about me. And I'm actually going to wait until I reach this critical threshold of seeing that I'm hurt enough by their lack of care and lack of investing in me the way that I'm investing in them, that I'm suddenly going to leave. And it's actually a big part of the reason fearful avoidants sometimes leave relationships seemingly out of the blue from the other person's end. Somebody might be like, everything was great, and the fearful avoidant left all of a sudden. Well, sometimes it's because there's this backstory of covert contracts and interaction tracking where this person feels like, okay, I'm overgiving, under receiving. But at its core, one of the things that's so solvable about this is if you just learn to communicate your needs, you wouldn't feel like this. You wouldn't feel alone. You wouldn't feel as resentful. You wouldn't feel like people don't care about you and aren't able to meet your needs. It's the fact that you're operating from these programs and patterns that helped you survive in childhood, but are not necessarily conducive at all to adult relationships, especially adult romantic relationships. So we have these 2 themes. Okay. And I'm going to tell you about the most important thing and how this all comes together and why fearful avoidants bring up past arguments. But you've got these covert contracts that lead to you interaction tracking and cause you to overgive and under receive. And these are all features of codependency. And by the way, if you want to go deeper into codependency, you can actually check out a fully free course about reconditioning your patterns of codependency and enmeshment. And this will help you see some profound results in the first 7 days. So I'll put a link down below, but it will really help you challenge these codependent ideas and patterns and fears that you have, and also learn what your needs are and how to communicate them in a way that will get you seen and heard without ever being a burden to anybody. But I'll put a link to that for free down below for a limited time. Now, the last major piece and how you're going to see this tie together is that if you do this for long enough, because you're interaction tracking, because you're operating by covert contracts, under giving and under receiving, this leaves you, point number 3, feeling very unseen and unheard. And when you reach this critical tipping point, either you'll leave a relationship all of a sudden, or the vast majority of the time, you will start communicating through negative framing. So watch this. Let's pretend that one thing that I really need in the relationship, and let's pretend it's with Bob, is for Bob to do more chores around the house. And let's say, if I'm fearful avoidant still, that I start doing extra chores around the house and lots of Bob's chores and do all these nice things for Bob, because I'm working my way up to being like, hey, Bob, I need you to do some chores too. Or I'm hoping Bob will see how much I'm doing and then also want to contribute. But this just leads to me overgiving and under receiving. So now I start paying attention, like, okay, I've done chores the last 5 or 6 times and Bob hasn't done them at all. And now I'm waiting and waiting for Bob to figure it out and pay attention and start taking his turn. But eventually I just get frustrated. And then by the 8th or 9th time that I'm doing the chores, I go to Bob and then I start communicating from frustration. Frustrated communication will almost always lead to something known as negative framing, which means I'm going to say, Bob, I've been doing all the last chores for the last 9 times. What's going on from your end? Why haven't you been able to do this? Why aren't you making an effort? Do you not care? Do you not this? Do you not that? And this isn't the answer to this, by the way. And number 3 is not going to be what you think. Okay. So then I communicate from negative framing. As soon as I communicate through negative framing, and especially from an emotionally charged place, somebody doesn't see and hear me. They just see and hear that I'm criticizing them. So they don't even hear what my need is, right? And there's an old saying, behind every criticism is a wish. And if I'm just communicating through criticism, Bob doesn't see my need or my wish. Bob just sees that I'm angry and now he's defensive. So then that whole argument that we had about the chores, I'm left feeling like Bob's just defending himself or in an argument. Maybe give each other the silent treatment for a day or two. And then we're back to the same old pattern. The moment we leave an argument or disagreement without, especially if you're listening to this as a fearful avoidant, without feeling seen and heard, without having your feelings validated. Because remember, there's been this backstory of the covert contracts and feeling like you're overgiving and under receiving and feeling alone in that. The moment that after all this time, you didn't get your point seen and heard, Bob didn't come to you because Bob was defensive. He was like, whoa, you're so angry at me. And he's defensive. The moment you didn't get Bob saying, hey, I'm so sorry I haven't been doing the chores. I see that you've actually been doing the chores so much over the past little while. And that must feel like I'm not showing up for you. And what do we need going forward? Okay, how can we take turns doing the chores? Unless you feel like you get 2 things in an argument, your feelings and perspective validated. And number 2, unless you actually feel like there's a strategy to stop this pattern from continuing, where you feel like you're overgiving and under receiving and nothing's getting resolved, you will always store that argument or disagreement as being unresolved. So let's say that some time passes and it's time to do the chores, and here you are and you're back at time for the chores. Well, because the last argument or disagreement you had was just you both bickering about chores and getting defensive, and then it was kind of swept under the rug and then nothing really got resolved, you never felt resolved in the first place. And the number one reason people, especially fearful avoidants, will bring up arguments from the past again is because you will bring up things that do not feel resolved. And unless you actually feel resolved, which again comes through 2 major ingredients, feeling like your feelings and perspective are seen and heard and actually validated, and feeling like there's a strategy to solve for the problem at hand, unless those things are covered, you'll always store that argument as we never actually got to resolution. So you're bringing up things from the past because they still exist for you in the present. They've never been solved for. They're still alive and well in your subconscious mind and in your perception and experience of the relationship. And until you learn to actually communicate your needs and see them through, listen, sometimes people won't actually meet your needs, but when you communicate healthily in real time, the vast majority of the time they will. And if they don't ever, despite you communicating healthily and creating strategies and doing it from a vulnerable perspective, if somebody doesn't meet your needs and yet you're communicating them, then you don't belong in a relationship with somebody who's never going to put in an effort, right? Like that's just that's not even an issue, right? If somebody's never caring to grow the relationship or make an effort, you're in the wrong relationship across the board. So if you do not get those 2 ingredients, feeling like there's a strategy, feeling like your perspective is seen and heard and validated, then you always store the argument as never being resolved. So it exists in the present, despite it being in the past. The challenge, the problem, the issue, it's not resolved. It's still here. So no wonder it's getting brought back up. So all of this to say, unless you learn to communicate your needs, share your feelings and perspective in a vulnerable space, and ensure that your partner can actually see and hear you and listen, you will keep bringing those arguments back up from the past because they're still alive in the present. If you want to do a deeper dive on rewiring those codependent patterns and learning your needs in more detail, again, you can check out that free course down below. I hope this video made sense to you and sort of just shed a little bit of light on this issue at hand. And if you have more questions, let me know in the comments below. And if you are somebody who feels like this could benefit somebody in your life and want to share it or subscribe to the channel, that's always amazing too. Would love to have you here. And thank you for watching.